When Caleb Reed was one paycheck away from losing everything, a Walmart parking lot became his battlefield. He gripped his truck keys with fingers that knew more about motor oil than silk ties, standing beside a pickup that had seen 3 presidents and countless heartbreaks. His golden retriever, Buster, sat like a trained guardian, muscles coiled with an intelligence that seemed almost human, the kind of dog that understood secrets before words were spoken. The Iowa wind carried the scent of autumn leaves and desperation, rustling through grocery bags that held more prayers than produce. "Stay close, boy," Caleb whispered, his voice breaking like a promise he couldn't keep. "Just like we practiced." The words carried the weight of rehearsed survival. Then she arrived in a moment that would break the internet. A black Tesla Model S sliced through the ordinary chaos with surgical precision, its silence announcing wealth louder than any engine could roar. The woman who emerged wore authority like a weapon. Silver hair swept into submission, eyes the color of winter storms, an Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars. She surveyed the parking lot like a queen inspecting conquered territory. "Excuse me." Her voice could have frozen fire. "This parking space is reserved." But what Buster did next defied every law of nature, loyalty, and logic that anyone thought they understood. Buster's entire body went rigid, not in aggression, but in recognition. The dog that had protected Caleb through 6 months of hell suddenly trembled like a tuning fork struck by lightning. His tail didn't wag. It quivered with an emotion that had no name. The woman froze mid-step, her steel composure cracking like ice under pressure. Her briefcase slipped from manicured fingers, hitting the asphalt with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Caleb felt the ground shift beneath his boots, though nothing had moved except the invisible threads that connected past to present. "I'm sorry, Mom," Caleb said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who apologized for existing. He's not usually like this. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were lies. Buster was exactly like this, with one person, a person who had been dead for 6 months. The woman's hand rose slowly, as if fighting against gravity itself, toward Buster's golden head. When her fingers made contact, the dog's eyes closed with the reverence of prayer answered. The Walmart parking lot had witnessed thousands of mundane moments, but this was different. Shoppers hurried past, oblivious to the fact that 2 strangers were discovering they weren't strangers at all. The woman's breathing became shallow, rapid, like someone drowning in memories. "What's his name?" she whispered, and her voice held none of the authority that had cut through the air moments before. It was the voice of someone finding something they'd lost. "Buster," Caleb managed, his throat tight. "He belonged to my wife first." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. The woman's eyes, those winter storm eyes, filled with something that looked suspiciously like tears. She blinked them away with the practice of someone who had forgotten how to cry in public. But her hand remained on Buster's head, and the dog leaned into her touch like he was coming home. "Helena Cross," she said finally, extending her other hand toward Caleb. Her grip was firm, but her fingers trembled like autumn leaves. "I don't usually do this." She gestured vaguely at the scene, the touching of dogs, the conversation with strangers, the cracking of her carefully constructed armor. Caleb noticed the faded tan line on her ring finger, the way she stood slightly off balance, the photograph visible in her purse that she quickly covered with her hand. "Caleb Reed." He shook her hand, noting how small it felt despite the power it clearly wielded. "And I don't think this is about parking spaces." Helena's laugh was sharp, brittle, like glass breaking in reverse. She looked around the parking lot as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the families loading groceries, the elderly man counting change, the teenager pushing carts with the resignation of someone working their first job. The silence stretched between them, filled with questions neither knew how to ask. Buster solved the problem by sitting directly between them, creating a triangle of confusion and possibility. His tail swept the asphalt in slow, deliberate arcs, as if conducting an orchestra only he could hear. Helena looked down at him, and for a moment her mask slipped completely. The CEO disappeared, leaving behind someone who looked lost and found at the same time. "Would you like to get coffee?" The words tumbled out of Caleb's mouth before his brain could stop them. He immediately regretted the suggestion. What did a man who counted quarters have to offer someone who drove a Tesla? But Helena's face did something unexpected. She smiled. Not the practiced smile of boardroom negotiations, but something real and fragile and utterly human. "I don't drink coffee with strangers," she said, but her tone held no conviction. Buster chose that moment to rest his head on her designer shoe, leaving golden fur on leather that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly rent. "But then again, Buster seems to think we're not strangers at all." The way she said it suggested she was beginning to suspect the same thing. Downtown Cedar Falls had exactly one coffee shop that wasn't attached to a gas station, and it was there that Caleb found himself 30 minutes later, still not entirely sure how it had happened. The Bell Tower Cafe occupied the ground floor of a building that had seen better decades, its brick walls holding the conversations of 3 generations. Caleb arrived first, choosing a corner table where Buster could lie without blocking foot traffic. The dog settled immediately, but his ears remained pricked toward the door. When Helena entered, she'd traded her business armor for jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Caleb's truck payment. She looked around the cafe with the careful attention of someone mapping an unfamiliar territory. Her eyes found Caleb's, and she offered a small wave that somehow managed to be both confident and uncertain. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Caleb admitted as she approached. Helena paused in the act of pulling out her chair, her expression shifting through several emotions too quickly to catalogue. "I wasn't sure either," she replied, settling into her seat with the careful grace of someone who had learned to command attention without trying. "But Buster would have been disappointed if I didn't." As if summoned by his name, Buster lifted his head and placed it squarely on Helena's lap. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed into the contact with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep and forgotten. Her hand found his ears automatically, scratching with the expertise of someone who had loved dogs before she'd learned to love power. "So what does a CEO do on Saturday mornings?" Caleb asked, wrapping his hands around a coffee mug that warmed his palms. Helena's laugh was different here, softer around the edges. "Work, mostly. Conference calls with Tokyo, emails that can't wait until Monday, reading reports that put insomniacs to sleep." She paused, studying his face. "What about you? 3 jobs, right?" Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. He hadn't mentioned multiple jobs. "How did you—" Helena's cheeks flushed pink, a color that humanized her more than any expensive makeup could. "Lucky guess," she said quickly, but her eyes darted away from his. "Single fathers usually work more than one job. It's just practical." The explanation felt rehearsed, but Caleb let it slide. Everyone had secrets, and Helena Cross struck him as someone who collected them like other people collected stamps. "Mechanic in the mornings, pizza delivery at night, office cleaning on weekends," he confirmed. "Finn's at his friend's house today, or I wouldn't be here." The mention of his son caused Helena's hand to still on Buster's head. "How old?" she asked, and something in her voice suggested the answer mattered more than casual conversation would warrant. 8. He's... Caleb's voice caught, and he cleared his throat. "He's everything good about his mother and nothing bad about me." Helena's eyes sharpened with interest, but before she could respond, Caleb's phone buzzed against the table. The caller ID made his blood freeze. Cedar Falls Elementary. Caleb answered on the second ring, his voice already tight with worry. Mr. Reed, this is Principal Martinez. Finn's had an accident on the playground. Nothing serious, but he's asking for you. We think his arm might be sprained. The words hit Caleb like physical blows. I'll be right there, he managed, already standing. Helena was on her feet before he'd finished the call. I'll drive, she said, her CEO voice returning with the efficiency of muscle memory. Caleb started to protest. He barely knew this woman, and involving her in his family crisis felt like crossing a line he wasn't ready to cross. But Buster was already moving toward the door, and Helena's car could get them there faster than his truck on a good day. The Tesla's interior smelled like leather and subtle perfume, a world away from the motor oil and desperation that clung to his pickup. Helena drove with the same controlled precision she wore like armor, her hands steady on the wheel while Caleb's shook in his lap. He'll be fine, she said quietly, and the certainty in her voice was a lifeline he didn't know he needed. Cedar Falls Elementary sat on Maple Street like a red brick promise of the future, its playground equipment bright against the autumn sky. Helena pulled into the visitor parking with the ease of someone accustomed to arriving places quickly. As they walked toward the entrance, Buster trotting between them, Caleb caught Helena studying the building with more attention than the situation seemed to warrant. Have you been here before? He asked. Helena's step faltered almost imperceptibly. No, she said, but her eyes lingered on the flagpole, the memorial garden, the bronze plaque near the entrance that Caleb had never bothered to read. Just, schools all look the same, don't they? Principal Martinez met them in the lobby, a kind-faced woman whose smile reached her eyes. Mr. Reed, Finn's in the nurse's office. The X-rays show it's just a sprain, but he was asking for you specifically. She glanced at Helena with polite curiosity. And you are? Helena extended her hand with the automatic professionalism of someone who introduced herself for a living. Helena Cross. I gave Mr. Reed a ride. The nurse's office smelled like antiseptic and Band-Aids, familiar scents that took Caleb back to his own childhood mishaps. Finn sat on the examination table, his left arm cradled in a sling, looking far too small for the brave smile he wore. Dad! I tried to do a flip on the monkey bars like Jake showed me, but I guess I'm not ready yet. Caleb's relief was a physical thing. Loosening muscles he hadn't realized were clenched. He gathered his son in a careful hug, breathing in the scent of childhood, grass stains and fruit snacks, and that indefinable smell that belonged only to 8-year-olds. Over Finn's shoulder, he saw Helena standing in the doorway, her face cycling through emotions he couldn't name. Who's the lady, Dad? Finn asked, peering around his father's shoulder with the unabashed curiosity of children. Is she your girlfriend? The question hit the room like a small bomb, sending color flooding to both Caleb's and Helena's faces. This is Helena, Caleb managed. She drove us here when you got hurt. Finn's eyes lit up with interest. Cool. What kind of car? Helena stepped forward, her smile genuine for the first time since they'd met. A Tesla. It's electric. Finn's jaw dropped with the appropriate reverence of a boy who understood that some cars were simply better than others. Can I see it sometime? The question was innocent, but it hung in the air with implications none of them were ready to examine. The hospital bills came later, delivered by a nurse with apologetic efficiency. Caleb's hands shook as he read the numbers. $2,847. His insurance would cover $400. The remaining balance might as well have been $4 million. He folded the paper carefully, his mind already calculating which bills he could skip, which meals they could do without. Helena appeared at his elbow like a whisper made flesh. Let me, she said simply, already reaching for her purse. Caleb's pride reared like a wounded animal. No, absolutely not. But Helena was already walking toward the billing desk, her credit card appearing in her hand like a magic trick. The transaction took less than 3 minutes and changed everything. Why? Caleb asked when she returned, his voice raw with emotions he couldn't name. Helena looked through the window at Finn, who was entertaining a younger patient with an animated story about his failed monkey bar adventure. Because that's what people do, she said quietly. That's what family does. The word hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Family. Caleb studied Helena's profile, noting the way her jaw tightened when she thought no one was looking, the way her fingers worried the edges of her purse. We're not family, he said carefully. Helena's smile was sad and knowing and full of secrets. Aren't we? The drive home was quiet, filled with the comfortable exhaustion that follows crisis averted. Finn dozed in the back seat, his head pillowed against Buster's flank, while Caleb tried to process what had happened. Helena drove with the same controlled precision, but something had shifted in the car's atmosphere. The barriers between stranger and friend had blurred into something more complicated. Your wife, Helena said suddenly, her voice careful. What was her name? Caleb's throat tightened around the words. Even 6 months later, saying Holly's name felt like swallowing glass. Holly Reed. Before we married, she was Holly Patterson. He didn't see Helena's hands clench on the steering wheel, didn't notice the way her breathing changed. She sounds like she was special. She was everything, Caleb said simply, and the truth of it filled the car like incense. Finn has her eyes, her laugh, her way of seeing the good in people before the bad. Helena pulled into his driveway, but made no move to leave. In the growing darkness, the Tesla's interior felt like a confessional. Patterson, she repeated quietly, as if testing the weight of the name. Do you know the name? Caleb asked, because something in her tone suggested familiarity. Helena's smile was sharp enough to cut. In a town this size, everyone knows everyone eventually. It wasn't an answer, but it was all she seemed willing to give. She helped carry a sleepy Finn to the front door, Buster trailing behind like a golden shadow. At the threshold, Helena paused. Thank you, Caleb said, inadequate words for an inadequate man. For the hospital, for the ride, for... I don't know what I would have done. Helena's hand rose to touch his cheek, a gesture so unexpected and tender that it stopped his words. You would have figured it out, she said. You always do. The certainty in her voice was unsettling, but before Caleb could question it, she was walking back to her car. Buster whined softly, torn between following her and staying with his family. The dog's distress was so acute that Helena turned back, kneeling to cup his face in her hands. Take care of them, she whispered, and the words sounded like a vow. 3 days passed before Caleb saw Helena again. 3 days filled with Finn's endless questions about the lady with the Tesla and the way Buster kept returning to the front window, watching for something that never came. Caleb found himself thinking about her at odd moments, the way her mask had slipped in the coffee shop, the expertise with which she'd handled Buster, the familial certainty in her voice when she'd talked about helping. On Tuesday evening, while Caleb was delivering pizzas through the tree-lined streets of Cedar Falls' affluent district, he saw the Tesla parked outside the Meridian Industries building. The lights were on in the top-floor office, a single figure silhouetted against the glass. Helena Cross, CEO, working late while the rest of the world went home to dinner and family television. The loneliness of the image struck him like a physical blow. He found himself pulling into the building's parking lot, though he couldn't have said why. The lobby was all marble and money, the kind of place that made his work boots feel inadequate against polished floors. The security guard looked up from his newspaper with the weary expression of someone accustomed to explaining why visitors couldn't just walk in. "I'm here to see Helena Cross," Caleb said, feeling foolish. The guard's eyebrows rose toward his receding hairline. "Miss Cross doesn't see visitors without appointments, especially not at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night." Caleb was about to retreat when the elevator doors opened and Helena emerged, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown timer. She stopped when she saw him, her professional mask sliding into place so smoothly it might have been choreographed. "Mr. Reed, this is unexpected." Her voice carried none of the warmth from the coffee shop, but her eyes, those winter storm eyes, held something that looked like relief. "I was delivering pizza in the neighborhood and saw your light on. Thought maybe you could use some company." Helena's laugh was sharp, professional. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm quite accustomed to working alone." The words were meant to dismiss him, but she made no move toward the elevator. Instead, she studied his face with the attention of someone reading fine print. "Although I suppose everyone deserves a break. There's a decent restaurant 2 blocks from here." The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu, where conversations were conducted in hushed tones and the waitstaff moved like shadows. Caleb felt every thread of his thrift store shirt, every scuff on his work boots, but Helena seemed oblivious to the stares their unlikely pairing attracted. She ordered wine that probably cost more than his weekly groceries, and seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts on the vintage. "You don't seem like the pizza delivery type," Helena said over appetizers that looked too beautiful to eat. Caleb set down his fork, studying her face. "What type do I seem like?" Helena considered the question with the seriousness of someone solving complex equations. "The type who builds things, who fixes what's broken, who doesn't give up when things get complicated." The accuracy of her assessment was unsettling. "You sound like you know me better than a coffee conversation would suggest." Helena's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. "Do I? Maybe I'm just good at reading people. It's a useful skill in business." But her eyes avoided his, and Caleb filed the evasion away with the growing list of questions he couldn't quite voice. "Tell me about Finn's mother," Helena said suddenly, changing the subject with the deftness of someone redirecting traffic. "How did you meet?" The question opened a door Caleb usually kept locked, but something about the intimate lighting and Helena's genuine attention made him want to answer. "College. She was studying education, I was in engineering. She had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered." Helena leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand. "What else?" The hunger in her voice was unmistakable, as if she were starving for details about a woman she'd never met. Caleb found himself talking about Holly's laugh, her terrible cooking, the way she sang off-key in the shower, and trained Buster to respond to commands in 3 different languages. Helena absorbed every word like someone memorizing scripture. "She sounds perfect," Helena said when he finished, and there was something wistful in her voice. "No one's perfect," Caleb replied. "Holly had her stubborn streaks, her blind spots, but she loved completely, you know. No halfway measures, no holding back." Helena's hand clenched around her wine glass, her knuckles white against the crystal. "Must be nice," she murmured, "to be loved like that." The loneliness in her voice was so raw that Caleb reached across the table without thinking, covering her hand with his. She stiffened at the contact, then relaxed into it with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep and buried. "Everyone deserves to be loved like that," he said quietly. Helena's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away with practiced efficiency. "Do they? Even people who've made choices that put career before everything else? People who've hurt others in the name of success?" The questions felt loaded with personal history, but before Caleb could respond, Helena's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen, and her entire demeanor shifted. "I have to take this," she said, already standing. "It's Tokyo." The moment of vulnerability vanished like morning mist, replaced by the steel-spined executive who commanded boardrooms and conquered markets. Caleb watched her pace by the window, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences that brooked no argument. When she returned, the walls were firmly back in place. "Rain check on dessert?" she asked, already signaling for the check. "Meridian's expansion into the Pacific Rim requires more hand-holding than I anticipated." She paid the bill with a credit card that gleamed like a weapon, declining Caleb's offer to split the cost with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Next time," she said, but something in her tone suggested she wasn't sure there would be a next time. The drive back to his neighborhood was quiet, the Tesla's engine humming beneath the weight of unspoken questions. Helena pulled into his driveway but made no move to leave, her hands gripping the steering wheel like an anchor. "Caleb," she began, then stopped, as if the words were too heavy to lift. "There are things about me you don't know, things that might change how you see me." "Try me," he said simply. Helena's laugh was bitter. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever." She reached across the center console to touch his hand, her fingers cold despite the car's warmth. "But thank you. For dinner, for company, for treating me like a person instead of a position." The gratitude in her voice was so genuine, it made his chest ache. That night, Caleb lay in bed listening to Buster pace the hallway, whining softly at intervals. The dog's distress was palpable, as if he were missing something essential. When Caleb finally gave up on sleep and wandered to the kitchen for a glass of water, he found Buster sitting by the front door, nose pressed to the glass, watching the empty street with the patience of someone expecting a miracle. "She'll be back, boy," Caleb whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. But even as he said it, he wondered if it was true. Helena Cross was clearly a woman with secrets, someone whose life operated on a level he could barely comprehend. What could she possibly want with a single father who delivered pizzas and counted quarters? Unless she wanted exactly what everyone wanted, to matter to someone who saw past the surface to the person underneath. The answer came 2 days later, in a phone call that would change everything Caleb thought he knew about coincidence, family, and the woman who'd paid his son's hospital bill. It was Thursday morning. Caleb was elbow-deep in an engine repair at Joe's garage when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer anyway. "Mr. Reed? This is Patricia Williams from Henderson Williams & Associates. We're the law firm handling the estate of Robert Patterson. I believe your late wife was Holly Patterson Reed." Caleb's hands stilled on the wrench, oil dripping onto concrete. "Yes, she was. But I don't understand. Holly said her family died when she was young." The lawyer's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering news that could be good or devastating. "Mr. Patterson's will was quite specific. He left half of his estate to his daughter Holly, with provisions that if she predeceased him, her portion would go to her surviving spouse and children. Mr. Reed, your wife inherited $23 million, and since her death, that inheritance belongs to you and your son." The words hit Caleb like physical blows. $23 million. Holly, who'd clipped coupons and shopped clearance sales, who'd never mentioned family money or estranged fathers. "There must be some mistake," he managed. "Holly would have told me." The lawyer's sigh carried the weight of family secrets and old wounds. "According to our records, Mr. Patterson and his daughter hadn't spoken in over 15 years. He'd been trying to reconcile before his death, but Holly died first," Caleb finished, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Mr. Reed, there's something else you should know. Mr. Patterson had another daughter, Helena Patterson, though she goes by her mother's maiden name now, Helena Cross. She's been managing the estate, waiting for us to locate Holly's family." The garage floor tilted beneath Caleb's feet. Helena Cross. Patterson. Holly's sister. The woman who'd paid Finn's hospital bill, who'd known exactly how to handle Buster, who'd seemed to know more about his life than casual conversation would explain. The sister Holly had never mentioned. The family she'd claimed was dead. "Mr. Reed, are you still there?" The lawyer's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Yes," Caleb managed. "I'm here. I need to process this." The understatement of the century. His wife had been rich, had family, had a sister who was now one of the most powerful people in Iowa. And that sister had been watching him, helping him, getting to know her nephew without revealing who she was. "Ms. Cross has requested a meeting," the lawyer continued, "to discuss the estate, and I believe to formally introduce herself to your family. Would tomorrow afternoon be convenient?" Caleb looked around the garage, at the oil stains, the tools that were older than his marriage, the invoice for Finn's hospital bill pinned to the corkboard like a reminder of how close to the edge they lived. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes," he said finally. "Tomorrow afternoon is fine." The rest of the day passed in a haze of disbelief and growing anger. Holly had lied to him for 13 years, had let him believe she was alone in the world while her sister built an empire, had let him struggle with medical bills and multiple jobs while $23 million sat in some bank account, waiting. By the time he picked up Finn from school, Caleb's hands were shaking with suppressed rage. "Dad, you look funny," Finn observed as they walked to the truck. "Like when you're trying to figure out why the toaster won't work." The innocent observation almost broke Caleb's composure. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that everything he thought he knew about his family was a lie? That his mother had secrets, that he had an aunt worth more money than they could count, that their days of struggling were over? "Finn," Caleb said carefully as they drove home, "what would you think if I told you that you had an aunt you'd never met?" Finn's face lit up with the uncomplicated joy of childhood. "Like Aunt Susan in the movies? The one who brings presents and teaches you bad words?" Despite everything, Caleb smiled. "Something like that. This aunt, she's been looking for us for a long time. Is it Helena?" Finn asked with the devastating insight that children sometimes possessed. "The lady with the Tesla. Because Buster really likes her, and Buster only likes family." The observation hit Caleb like a revelation. Of course, Buster had recognized Helena because she was family. The dog had known what none of them had been told. That evening, Caleb called the number the lawyer had given him. Helena answered on the second ring, her voice professionally neutral until she realized who was calling. "Caleb, Patricia Williams said she spoke with you. No more pretense, no more careful distances, just the acknowledgement of truths that could no longer be hidden." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended, loaded with the weight of discovery and betrayal. Helena's silence stretched so long he thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, vulnerable, nothing like the commanding presence he'd come to know. "Because I was afraid," she said simply. "Afraid you'd hate me for the choices I made. Afraid Finn would reject me like Holly did. Afraid that knowing who I was would change everything between us." Her honesty was a gift he hadn't expected, but it didn't ease the sting of deception. "Holly told me her family was dead," Caleb said, the words sharp as accusations. "In a way, we were," Helena replied. "The day she chose love over duty, Father cut her off completely. Changed his will, forbade her name in the house, acted like she'd never existed. And I did nothing to stop him. I chose the company, the money, the approval of a man who valued control over love." The pain in her voice was raw, genuine, but Caleb's anger was too fresh to be soothed by explanations. $23 million, Helena. Do you know what that money would have meant to Holly? To us? The medical bills after Finn was born, the student loans, the mortgage we couldn't afford. His voice broke on the words, and Helena's sharp intake of breath told him she understood the magnitude of what her silence had cost. I tried to reach out, she whispered. After Father died, I hired investigators to find her. But by the time they located you... The words hung in the air like a bridge half built. By the time they'd found Holly, she was already gone, taking her secrets to a grave that Helena had never visited. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Helena continued. I know I can't undo the years of pride and stubbornness that kept our family apart. But Caleb, please don't punish Finn for my mistakes. He's the last piece of Holly I'll ever have. The desperation in her voice cut through his anger like a blade through silk. Caleb closed his eyes, seeing his son's face when he'd asked about having an aunt. The uncomplicated joy, the immediate acceptance. Finn had Holly's heart, her ability to love without conditions. The meeting tomorrow, Caleb said finally. We'll be there. But Helena, no more secrets, no more lies. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly. No more secrets, she agreed, and the relief in her voice was palpable. I promise. The law offices of Henderson, Williams and Associates occupied 3 floors of Cedar Falls' tallest building, all marble lobbies and mahogany conference tables that spoke of old money and older secrets. Caleb arrived with Finn and Buster, feeling like actors walking onto the wrong stage. Finn pressed his face to the elevator's glass walls, watching the city shrink beneath them with the fearless wonder of childhood. Helena was waiting in the conference room, but she wasn't the commanding CEO or the vulnerable woman from dinner. She was something new, a mixture of both, wearing a simple dress that cost more than Caleb's monthly salary, but sitting with her hands folded like a schoolgirl, awaiting judgment. When Finn entered the room, her face transformed with an emotion so pure it took Caleb's breath away. You must be Finn, she said, her voice soft as prayer. I'm Helena. I was your mummy's sister. Finn studied her with the serious attention he usually reserved for complex Lego instructions. Mom never said she had a sister, he said finally, with the devastating honesty of children. Why didn't she tell us about you? Helena's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. Because sometimes adults make mistakes, sweetheart. Big ones. And by the time we figure out how to fix them, it's too late. She knelt to Finn's level, bringing herself into his world. But I've been looking for you for a very long time. And I hope maybe we could be family now. Finn considered this with the gravity of someone solving world hunger. Do you know how to play video games? The question was so unexpected that Helena laughed, a sound like bells breaking. I'm afraid I'm terrible at them, but I'm willing to learn if you're willing to teach me. Finn's face lit up with the joy of someone who'd found a new project. Okay, he said solemnly. But I get to pick the first game, and you have to promise not to quit when you start losing. Helena held out her pinky finger. I promise. They shook on it with the ceremony of diplomats signing treaties, and Caleb felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. The legal proceedings took hours, documents to sign, accounts to transfer, trusts to establish for Finn's future. $23 million, translated into numbers on paper, investment portfolios, real estate holdings that Holly had never known existed. Caleb's signature felt strange on checks with so many zeros, as if he were playing a game where the rules kept changing. There's one more thing, Patricia Williams said as they neared the end of the marathon session. Mr. Patterson's personal effects. He left specific instructions that they should go to Holly's family. She gestured to a banker's box sitting in the corner like a patient witness. Letters, photographs, family documents, things he saved. Helena's hands shook as she lifted the box lid. Inside were decades of carefully preserved memories. Holly's school pictures, report cards, artwork from elementary school, letters she'd written as a teenager before the estrangement, full of dreams and hopes and love for the sister she'd looked up to. "He kept everything," Helena whispered, her voice breaking. "Even after he disowned her, he kept everything." At the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope marked, "For Helena." Helena's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing their father's careful handwriting. "My dear Helena," she read aloud, her voice barely audible. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found Holly's family. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I hope you can forgive an old man's pride. I drove away the daughter who had the courage to choose love, and I kept the one who chose duty. I realize now which choice took more strength." Helena's voice broke completely on the next line. "Take care of them, Helena. Be the family to Holly's son that we failed to be to her. Money means nothing if there's no one to love. I learned that too late, but perhaps you can learn it in time." The letter was signed simply, "Your loving father," and Helena clutched it to her chest like a lifeline. Finn had been listening with the quiet attention of someone processing information beyond his years. When Helena finished reading, he climbed into her lap with the unself-conscious affection of children. "It's okay," he said solemnly, patting her shoulder. "Grandpa sounds like he was sorry, and Mom always said sorry was the most important word grown-ups could learn." Helena held him close, her face buried in his hair that smelled like playground and innocence. "Your mum was very wise," she managed, "and you're very kind, just like she was." Over Finn's head, her eyes met Caleb's, and in them he saw gratitude, grief, and the tentative hope of someone learning to believe in second chances. The drive home was quiet, each of them processing the day's revelations in their own way. Finn fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the emotional weight of discovering family he'd never known existed. Helena followed them in her Tesla, and Caleb found himself watching her in his rear-view mirror, this woman who was now irrevocably part of their lives. At home, they put Finn to bed together, Helena reading from a book about dogs, while Caleb straightened covers and checked the nightlight. It felt natural, this shared bedtime routine, as if they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. When Finn was finally asleep, they retreated to the kitchen, where Buster promptly stationed himself between them like a golden mediator. "I keep expecting to wake up," Caleb said, cradling a cup of coffee that tasted different now that he could afford better beans. "This morning I was a mechanic counting quarters. Tonight I'm a millionaire with a sister-in-law." Helena smiled, her first genuine expression of the day. "And I keep expecting you to tell me to leave, to say that money doesn't erase years of abandonment." "Maybe it doesn't," Caleb said carefully. "But Finn doesn't know about abandonment. He just knows he has an aunt who wants to learn video games and a grandfather who saved his mother's drawings." He studied Helena's face, noting the way her guard had finally dropped completely. "And maybe that's enough to start with." Helena's smile was tremulous, hopeful. "I'd like that, to start with enough and see where it leads." She reached across the table to touch his hand, her fingers warm now instead of cold. "I know I can't replace Holly. I know I can't undo the years we lost. But maybe we can build something new, something that would make her proud." Caleb thought about Holly, about her capacity for forgiveness and her belief in second chances, about the way she'd loved completely, without reservation, and how that love had shaped their son into someone who could accept an aunt with the simplicity of childhood faith. She'd want Finn to know his family, he said finally. All of his family. 3 months later, as autumn gave way to winter and Helena's Tesla became a familiar sight in their driveway, Caleb realized that families weren't always born. Sometimes they were chosen, built from the careful architecture of shared meals and bedtime stories, and the patient work of learning to trust again. Helena had become Aunt Helena to Finn, teaching him business principles through lemonade stands and board games, spoiling him with the careful precision of someone making up for lost time. The money had changed their lives in practical ways. No more multiple jobs, no more counting quarters, no more lying awake at night wondering how to pay for necessities. But it was the family that had transformed them, turning their house into a home that echoed with laughter and arguments and the comfortable chaos of people who belonged to each other. And sometimes, in the evening light that slanted through their kitchen windows, Caleb caught Helena looking at Finn with an expression that was pure Holly. The same protective love, the same fierce determination to shield him from the world's sharp edges. In those moments, he understood that grief and gratitude could coexist, that losing Holly had been devastating, but finding Helena had been a gift he'd never thought to ask for. The viral video that would eventually make them internet famous started as a simple moment, Helena teaching Finn to change a tire while Buster supervised from the driveway. A neighbor had filmed it through their fence, capturing the sight of a CEO in designer clothes kneeling in the grass, her hands dirty with motor oil, while an 8-year-old boy patiently explained the proper torque for lug nuts. The caption read, "When your aunt is a badass businesswoman, but your nephew teaches her the important stuff," and within hours it had been shared across every platform that mattered. But fame was just noise compared to the quiet revolution happening in their daily lives. Helena had learned to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. Finn had mastered the art of the business handshake. And Caleb had discovered that love multiplied rather than divided when shared among family. They'd found each other in a Walmart parking lot, strangers connected by a dog's recognition and the invisible threads that bind families across time and silence and the particular grief of words left unspoken. And if sometimes Caleb still whispered commands to Buster in moments of uncertainty, if sometimes Helena still reached for her phone during family dinners before remembering that the most important work happened away from conference tables, if sometimes they all missed Holly with an ache that threatened to break them, well, that was the price of loving completely, and it was a price they'd learned to pay gladly. In the end, the CEO had done exactly what the viral video promised. She'd gone viral not through corporate conquest, but through the simple act of kneeling in a driveway, learning to be human again from an 8-year-old boy who carried his mother's heart and his father's hands, and the particular grace of children who believe in second chances. It was a small revolution, measured in shared meals and bedtime stories and the patient work of building family from the broken pieces of what came before. And Buster, golden witness to it all, settled into his role as the dog who'd known all along that some commands, "Stay close, just like we practiced," were less about obedience and more about love finding its way home.